Welcome to the Guaranteed Irish Business Podcast, where each week we're joined by leaders of Guaranteed Irish member businesses to chat about how they sustain jobs, communities and provenance. Supported by FBD Insurance, Ireland's largest homegrown insurer. Support, it's what we do.
Hello and welcome to the Guaranteed Irish Business Podcast. Hi there, my name is Bríd O'Connell and joining me today is Gillian Harford, Country Executive of the 30% Club Ireland, to discuss International Women's Day, pinkwashing and what's next for women in business. Gillian, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Bríd. It's great to be here.
Delighted to have you, especially in light of the fact that we're celebrating International Women's Day tomorrow. Tell us a little bit about the 30% Club as a whole and how the Irish chapter was set up.
The 30% Club is a global campaign supported by chairs and CEOs of medium to large organisations who are committed to greater gender balance at the most senior levels in their organisations, but committed to greater gender balance because it makes business sense as well as being a very good thing to do. It was established in 2010 out of the UK and it now operates in 20 different chapters around the world. In Ireland, we started in 2015. I got involved at that point, and there were 30 organisations supporting. And last week, we announced our 300th supporter. So across our chairs and CEOs, we represent nearly 700,000 employees out of Ireland. And we also have representatives from every sector, from public, from private, from state, semi-state and multinational. So we definitely feel like we're starting to make progress in terms of the Irish.
Certainly are. What a jump and what an uptake, I suppose. So obviously the time is right. A lot of things are happening. A tipping point has been reached. And it's all about empowering females to become leaders. Maybe you could define for us what exactly female leadership means and how do you define where that role starts in a business?
Well, if we look at where the 30% Club came from, when it started in the UK, it focused primarily on gender balance at board level and particularly gender balance on the board of listed companies. When we started in Ireland in 2015, we felt if that was our target market, it would be relatively small. Small in terms of the number of companies, but also small in terms of the breadth of Irish business, which is so much more than just the listed companies. So when we started in Ireland, our definition was gender balance at board level and gender balance at C-suite level, which is the top team within the organisation. We're really delighted that the rest of the 30% Club retrofitted back in the Irish view, and now the 30% Club at a global level looks at boards and C-suite. But we're very conscious that you can't get to 30% at C-suite if you don't have strong representation in the pipeline. So while we track progress based on boards and C-suites, we monitor future potential in terms of male-female balance throughout management structures.
And how do you do that? How do you monitor the male-female balance coming through at the lower levels?
It's relatively easy for listed organisations because listed organisations produce their data. And we're also very fortunate in Ireland that there's a government-based initiative, Balance for Better Business, which does quite a bit of tracking for us. Prior to that, the 30% Club did its own research because there was a dearth of data capture in Ireland. But now the CSO have come on board and they produce regular updates on women in business, which is really helpful. And we now have, well, I call it the advantage, not everybody sees it as an advantage. We now have the advantage of gender pay gap reporting in Ireland, which obviously gives us access to a whole new set of data, not just the gender pay gap itself, but some of the wider measures in the legislation that give us some useful information in terms of male-female breakdown by quartiles and on other factors as well.
And is that information made available as a result of work by the 30% Club here?
We'd like to think that a lot of it is definitely our research. We drove it ourselves because it didn't exist. We were the lead instigators behind Balance for Better Business, and Leo Varadkar was the Taoiseach at the time and became a great champion for it, and the first two co-chairs of Balance for Better Business, Bríd Horan and the sadly departed Gary Kennedy, both came from the 30% Club, as do Angus Hegarty and Julie Cinnamon. So we like to think that we were trailblazing in terms of let's count data, because if you're not tracking data, you can never really be sure of progress.
Yeah, for sure. What's measured is
What's measured gets done.
For sure. And I have to say, well done to the 30% Club here in Ireland, ably led by yourself and, of course, your wonderful chairperson, Melissa O'Queeve, in relation to not just being an influencer here at home, but obviously an influencer within the global 30% Club to get them to change their criteria. So, and it's so much more important because, as you said, if it doesn't come through the pipeline, how can we expect to affect change at the top? It's never going to happen.
No, and we've seen this in other countries, particularly other countries that have focused on quotas rather than targets at a legislative level. We're very much supportive of targets within the 30% Club. But if you take some countries that have gone down the quota route, they've met the quotas, but they've taken women out of the pipeline and into the board, and they haven't thought about where does the next set of talent come from. And really what we're talking about here is how do you integrate D&I as part of your sustainability agenda, or really as part of your survivability agenda, which is what sustainability is really all about. And if you're not thinking about talent pipeline and just thinking about filling a number for today, success won't be sustained.
International Women's Day is tomorrow now, Gillian, and it used to be a day for pink cupcakes and pinkwashing, as they called it. So I'm delighted to see that's left behind us. And indeed, we have a big event on ourselves. But maybe tell us a little bit about what pinkwashing is and how we have changed to improve the message and the importance of International Women's Day, including the whole conversation there about diversity and inclusion.
Pinkwashing is one of those things. If I talk to some groups, they think it's about women. If I talk to other groups, they think it's about other categories. But really what we're seeing in Ireland, very much in evidence, is this move away from tokenism around gender balance. There was probably a point in time when we had companies proclaiming to be great places to work for women, talking about it on their website, thinking about it in terms of their promotions and things like events and flying flags, but there was very little substance behind it. Our experience across 30% Club members is that there is now genuine substance. So we have companies that are at early stages of their journey, but they have real action plans and real commitments to change from an employee perspective. But ultimately, where I am the biggest supporter of and where I like to help companies get to is those Irish companies that are at the more mature stage. And they're not just thinking about diversity from an employment perspective. They're looking at it in terms of female customers and how they get across a gendered message to customers.
Of the population.
Exactly. What they're talking about in terms of supply chain, what they're talking about in terms of purchasing. So we're seeing much greater examples of D&I and gender balance as integral to the business strategy rather than something that happens as isolated initiatives led out by HR.
And in terms then of the men and the role of men, because we all still love our men folk out there, so there's no handbag bashing going on here. In terms of men supporting women in the working world, what more can they do without being accused of pinkwashing? And they want to do the right thing. So it's kind of a tightrope for them who really genuinely, so many fabulous men that I've come in contact with through my working life are so supportive, but they also have children, they have wives, they have mothers, so they're so respectful and they want to do it, but they're nearly afraid in some cases. So how can they help without being accused of doing it for optics?
I think one of the things that always surprises me is this idea that International Women's Day is about women. If you look back at the history of International Women's Day, it's really about women coming forward and fighting for a better workplace for men and for women. And so many of the things that we look at in terms of gender progress benefit both men and women alike. But for me, the importance of men within the conversation, and which is definitely why the 30% Club focuses on chairs and CEOs, is that the reality of the world we live in is that a significant percentage of chairs and CEOs are men. Forbes recently came out and said for the first time ever in terms of the Fortune 500, the number of female CEOs has gone into double figures, which is frightening because that means 90% are men. So if change in gender balance is driven by CEOs, men not only have a part to play, but they have the leading role. In some ways, it is great when male executives come forward and say, I want to create a better workplace for my daughter. I value my daughter's contribution as much as my son's. I like to say, well, how about if you make it a better workplace for your peers and colleagues, because your daughter mightn't get to the workplace for another 10 or 15 years, but can we change it today? There's also the concern that we want better workplaces for men and women alike. Men want to be able to show more vulnerability. They want to be able to get more involved in childcare, in elder care. They want a balance to their life as well. So how do we find a way for us to work together without men thinking that this is a zero-sum game? It can be sad sometimes, particularly with younger men when they say to me, but Gillian, if you're successful, I have no career prospects. And that's not the case. What we're trying to do is to make sure that talent can progress proportionate to how it's represented. And when that balance isn't right, either in favour of men or women, we lose out in the value of overall talent.
And actually that brings us on to a much bigger conversation, which we will have tomorrow at our event. But it's really about how do we measure and define what success is, because if the man has a more balanced work-life balance, you know, there's a whole level of success there that very often goes uncounted because they're so, I suppose, dominant and therefore present in the workplace. So there's a huge imbalance that has to be redressed for both genders, really.
Yeah, like some of it comes very much from society.
For sure.
There is no doubt about it, and every study shows that no matter what happens, women still take on a higher proportion of housework compared to men. Women still take on more of the caring responsibilities, whether it's for children or elder care, than men. But some of that is changing, and I like to talk about the fact that we could wait forever for society to change and take those changes from outside into our businesses. But actually, if we can make some of the changes within our business and focus them outwards, that's how you can really start to change and drive change in different ways. So it's great to see Irish companies stepping up without legislation or without being forced and saying, these are policies we're putting in place to encourage men to be able to take greater parental leave or paternity leave. These are policies we're putting in place to recognise that work and life are not as separate as they would have been, say, in my generation or my father's generation, and that our workforce want to think about working in a different way, a more modern way that hopefully will encourage more women to be able to stay in the workplace, build a bigger career and have access to wider opportunities.
And I wonder sometimes, is that changed, it's slow, because are women still a little bit adverse to risk? Where are they on their pensions? Where are they on their finances, their financial freedom? You know, it seems to me that women are still less likely to have investments outside of pensions when you look at all the stats and data that are coming through at the moment. Where's the difference there between women and men, and how can we address it?
Somebody gave me this great statistic a little while ago that I still work on, that when men and women are age 20, they have equal opportunity in terms of pension at age 60. But by the time they get to 60, men are 60% better off than women. And it's driven by what I talk about as the triple bind. So women earn less. Because they tend to be in lower value roles, or they tend to stop at a certain point in the career chain. They also tend to have...
That's historical, I assume, at this stage.
It's still
not happening, is it?
It still is. Like, we still see a higher percentage of women in certain sectors of the economy where the average salary is less. There still aren't enough women in senior roles. The gender pay gap is showing us that. So women earn less overall.
Okay.
Women are more likely to take periods out of work that aren't covered by pension. whether it's through maternity or working part-time for a couple of years. And women are also less likely to make discretionary investments. Like, women are less likely to make ABCs.
Right.
Women are less likely to take out investment products, because when there's spare money in the home, women tend to prioritize the children, the house, what needs to be done. They don't always think about their value and their worth. And this translates into investment. Mara Curtin, who's going to be on the panel with me tomorrow from Davy, shared some really interesting research recently that said 80% of women die single, either through personal choice, through widows, or through divorce. And when you think that we live on average 5 years longer than our male partners, we need to be thinking about our future, but sometimes we tend to focus on the present. I don't think women are risk averse. To me, that always sounds a little bit negative. I think women in general, and not all women, but women in general, like to be a bit more risk informed.
Very good way of putting it, actually. Yeah.
So we think about different options, but we're not always as focused maybe as we should be, as I said, in terms of thinking about our value and our worth and looking after that from our financial perspective.
Less selfish? Not to be too hard on the men, but is that really what's happening? We do put everybody first, children, older parents.
I think there is a bit. If you're at the event tomorrow, I'll share a little story on that about when we put ourselves first.
Okay, well, I think it's time we do it anyway. And it's good to see and hear those stats, because not always they're frightening, but it's also wake up time for women to, I suppose, use their investment strategy or consider having an investment strategy, number one. And number two, well, if we're living it longer and we're going to end up on our own, we really need to make sure we're looked after. So lots of food for thought there, Gillian. Yeah. Really interesting.
And like, we're having the conversation here in terms of the negative, but there's actually the positive side of it. Because what we are finding now is women working longer and having their own money. Women live longer, so they are more likely to inherit some of that baby boomer wealth. So definitely a lot of financial services firms are now thinking about what the female side of baby boomer money and where it's going to be invested and spent. And also what we're starting to see is that women are quite happy to be investors. They like to think about it in a different way, but they're actually very open to investing in different ways and to think about entrepreneurs, particularly supporting female entrepreneurs, investing in smaller business, investing in family business. And that's a very important sector in Ireland in terms of generating capital.
And the family businesses, for the most part, make up most of Irish businesses out there. So we really need to look at that. And it's interesting you're after bringing that up. In terms of telling me and informing maybe the listeners as to what the difference is between a brand supporting equality over just the team supporting equality. How do you make that difference?
Well, if you think about it from an organisation perspective, I like to talk about, again, if a company is only thinking about initiatives and thinking very internally focused, then everything they're working on might be in the HR space or the policy space. When you have a company that is thinking more about diversity as part of their business strategy and what their brand means, they're taking an external look as well as an internal look. So they look at their advertising, for example, and think about, does this reflect the customer base that we serve? When they think about their product research and product development, they're not just thinking about a single consumer, they're thinking about a range of consumers, and they're using internal diversity to generate external diverse thought. If you look at, I won't name names because it wouldn't be fair to name names, but we had a really interesting presentation at the 30% Club when we were talking about business topics, because we don't talk about diversity all the time. But we actually had a great session last year on marketing, and one of the drinks companies came in and they talked about how they really put a a diversity lens across their product development, across their marketing, across their consumer strategy, because ultimately they want to appeal to a broad range of consumers. But to do that, they need to think about, does their external brand and their internal employment brand reflect one another? Because that's what they're now seeing as being so important to business success.
Interesting, isn't it? And it's great to see that broader look being taken. And of course, let's be honest, if you want to attract, I suppose, or influence female, there's another 50% of a population out there in terms of product.
Yes.
I'm thinking particularly of the large drinks companies.
Yeah. Well, regularly we talk about diversity as if we're always focusing on minority groups, because people say to me, well, Gillian, why do you focus so much on gender? Why aren't you talking about X, Y, and Z? And I go, but I do talk about X, Y, and Z, because when I'm talking about gender, I'm talking about 50% of the population who encompass X, Y, and Z, but it's a majority conversation, not a minority conversation. So it makes huge business sense not to walk away from this space.
I think it's fantastic, and I really admire you. And of course, I'd like to let the listeners know Guaranteed Irish is a big supporter of the 30% Club, and we absolutely love being part of it and hearing and learning so much, informing ourselves. But you know, there's still a long way to go in Ireland. How do we compare to Europe when it comes to female leadership and equality in the workplace? Sometimes I feel we've a long way to go, Gillian.
The first thing I always say to people when they say, you know, why are you bothering? Because this has been going on forever. I like to turn around and say the reality is that we haven't been focusing on this in Ireland for a very long time. I come from Irish industry. I spent 40 years with my previous employer, and I was involved in so many things in the Irish landscape. We weren't talking seriously about this until around 2015.
I agree with that, and I can vouch for that, because it certainly wasn't a conversation.
No, and if you think of, like, in the UK, this came to the fore in the early 21st century. Early 21st century, we were doing Celtic Tiger, and then we were recovering from Celtic Tiger. So these weren't conversations we were having. So they're still relatively new, but we have done amazingly well to catch up and overleap. So if we look at where Ireland fits within the EU 27, we have now moved significantly through those rankings and are now ahead of so many other European countries at board level, and purely on the basis of voluntary targets, not on quotas. Because we have focused on both board and C-suite, compared to some European countries, we're actually doing better at C-suite than they are. And because we're still pretty much in a very tight labour market in Ireland, the focus in Irish companies and multinationals based out of Ireland around recruiting diverse talent is still very strong, because that's what organisations and industries need to do to fill jobs. So I think we are doing an awful lot better. I get to see a lot of the numbers from the other 30% Club chapters around the world. Out of the 20 chapters, we are only the third chapter to have exceeded 30% in terms of our listed companies.
You've mentioned before, Gillian, that building confidence in leadership is situational based. Can you explain this?
I have lots of colleagues in the 30% Club, and I'm one of them, that say, you know, when we're talking about making progress, we have to stop talking about fixing the women and instead talk about changing the system instead. But everywhere I go, the topic of confidence comes up, the topic of imposter syndrome. I do have some colleagues who say imposter syndrome doesn't exist, but I meet so many women who say, I wish I was more confident. I wish I could bring that confidence into different spaces the way some of my male colleagues do. And what we've tried to do on some of the things that we've focused on more recently is to say, actually, all of us have the potential to be confident in the right situation. And all of us carry the risk of not being confident in certain situations. So how do we learn which situations suit me best? What skills do I need? But also what we try to do is we try to talk to leaders, particularly male leaders who want to encourage more of their young female talent to come forward, they might often say to me, Gillian, how can I build more confidence in the younger women on my team? And I say, stop trying to build confidence in the younger women. Start thinking about how you create situations to give them the opportunity to display the confidence that they have within them.
Well, that's a great approach, actually.
And that can actually change the dial quite a lot. You know, if we keep saying to ourselves, we're not confident and we're here as imposters, it's very hard to make progress. Whereas if you can say to yourself, I'm not confident public speaking on a stage, but I'm really confident as a networker. You can then think about, how can I do more networking, or how can I learn some tools to be better on stage, or vice versa, rather than thinking that confidence is linear and I've no control over it.
Actually, brilliant. You've just given a great example there. That's fantastic, and something that we can all learn from and apply in our own businesses. However, there is a difference between confidence and competence. And a lot of times I would see people who are super confident and they're not so competent. So where do we draw the line there, and how can we change that so we're not then building imposter syndrome? Because when they get to a certain level, it'll be flushed out. So how do we manage to avoid that from the get-go?
That's a hard one, you know, because for me it's non-binary. You know, it's not a case that there is nobody who is confident and not competent, and there is nobody who is competent and not confident. Everyone has the potential to be a bit of both. I think that the danger is where confidence exceeds competence, and you're bluffing your way through it. That's where it tends to be a risk. What we do tend to see, and I hate stereotypes and I hate generalizing, but what we do tend to see is that women like to be 100% sure of their competence before they want to display their confidence.
Yes, I've seen that.
So we see it, and we get it every time we do research. We do see it every time we do an event. This idea that women won't put themselves forward for the next step unless they can tick every box.
Until they're fully informed.
Yes. Yeah. They have to feel, I have to be competent in every requirement before I can apply for promotion.
I've seen that so often myself,
Men can be a little bit more confident and say, well, I can tick lots of them and I'll take a chance. Whereas, you know, we need to redress the balance. Or actually what I say, which again comes back to stop trying to fix women and change the system. I like to talk to companies and say, stop putting requirements on a job ad. You know, describe jobs in a different way. Stop thinking about 10 tick boxes that you have to be able to put the right mark in before you can put yourself forward. But it's a
but also there's a societal
challenge
thing there, isn't it? Because the male, now I know it's very generalized, the male in terms of not having the full competencies and everything, and the concept of taking a chance for the others.
Yes.
That is nearly a societal thing from birth, almost innate, that the man can go out there and, I don't want to say wing it in some cases. Is that the case? And why is that there? Because there is that difference for sure. I've seen it.
I would suggest to anybody who's listening today, who has had the opportunity or the challenge of minding a toddler, and I would say, when the
pleasure of minding a toddler, you
pleasure,
there, Gillian.
Yes, it's been a while since I've minded a toddler. When a 2-year-old boy jumps up on the back of the couch, you say, boys will be boys. When a 2-year-old girl jumps up on the back of a couch, you're more likely to say, be careful, mind yourself, get down now like a good girl. I like to say, we teach our girls to be good, we teach our boys to be brave from the very outset. And maybe actually we need to teach them both to be a bit of both.
A very good note to come to my last question. Goal of with representation of women on boards exceeded the 30% target in 2022. Well done. So what's next, Gillian? Are we going for 50%? How are you going to manage that?
I hope your listeners will agree more than anything else is that a brand is something that you don't mess with. Even though I regularly get asked, when are you going to rename yourselves the 50% Club? The 30% is on the basis of a minimum rather than a maximum. We see that as the starting point, not in terms of gender balance, but in terms of how many voices in a room do you need to have a coalition to drive change. And typically in terms of a group of 10, you need 3 voices. And that's where the concept comes from. Ideally, we will be the 30% Club until every company has a board with 30%. Every company has a C-suite with 30%. And not just in Ireland, but in every chapter of the 30% Club around the world. I kind of think by the time we get to that, maybe we won't need a 30% Club anymore. Yeah. Never mind renaming. But for now, the brand is very important to us. And we'll keep going because we're there in terms of the listed companies in Ireland. We still have a way to go in terms of some of the private companies and the smaller companies that are catching up very quickly.
Well, and 30%, of course, is only a minimum, as you say.
Only a minimum.
Well, thank you very much, Gillian Harford, from Country Executive of the 30% Club Ireland. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And more importantly, thank you so much for celebrating our International Women's Day with us this year. We're really looking forward to having great fun at that tomorrow. To learn more about the 30% Club and the work they do, we will leave a link to their website in the show notes. Thank you all, as always, for listening, and don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you're listening to leave us a review if you like this episode.
The Guaranteed Irish Business Podcast, sponsored by FBD Insurance, Ireland's largest homegrown insurer. Support. It's what we do.